Welcome to The Explainer. We usually think of funding for the arts as just a universally good thing, right? A total positive. But Robert Hewison's analysis of the UK's cultural evolution uncovers this absolutely fascinating modern history. We're talking about a 15-year period that completely reshaped art, politics, and money, and how those three forces intertwine in ways we honestly don't always realize.
In his book, Cultural Capital, Hewison presents us with a really captivating core mystery. How exactly did a massive, completely unprecedented financial boom in the arts come with incredibly complex, hidden ideological strings?
Okay, let's dive right into how we're going to unpack this. We'll look at the transformation in 4 parts: a cultural golden age, the creative economy, the Faustian bargain, and finally the age of lead.
So, Section 1, a cultural golden age, the hook and the boom.
Picture this for a second. It's March 2007. Prime Minister Tony Blair is standing right in the middle of the massive, awe-inspiring turbine hall of the Tate Modern, proudly declaring the past decade a genuine golden age for the arts. And honestly, the numbers kind of backed him up. Annual museum visits hit a staggering 40 million. 40 million. That's a massive jump from the previous 24 million. And it wasn't some happy accident either. It was driven entirely by the government's bold move to just scrap entry charges to all national museums and galleries.
But the winds didn't stop at the museum doors for sure. The era brought a flourishing film industry, regional theater revivals that were incredibly adventurous and actually filling seats, plus brilliant new infrastructure projects popping up, like the Sage Gateshead up in the Northeast. For a cultural scene that had been, frankly, virtually starved of public funding before 1997, this felt like a massive, undeniable revival.
And the absolute flagship of all this progress? The Tate Modern. Think about it. They took a decommissioned, completely abandoned power station in Southwark, which at the time was one of the most deprived boroughs in the country, and converted it into a world-renowned museum of modern art. It was a literal miracle. It perfectly symbolized the economic magic and the sheer urban regeneration that this kind of cultural investment could spark. It proved that art really could revitalize entire neighborhoods.
Moving right along to Section 2, the creative economy and the neoliberal shift.
Now, the crucial shift here was ideological. We're talking about neoliberalism, basically the idea of applying market rules to all aspects of human life. The new Labour government essentially took the market-driven consensus established earlier by Margaret Thatcher and seamlessly integrated it into the arts. So suddenly, market efficiency, rather than just pure aesthetic value, was dictating cultural investment. Culture was transitioning from being viewed purely as a public good to acting as an economic engine.
But, the cultural establishment wasn't exactly thrilled about this. John Tusa, who was the managing director of the Barbican, voiced a pretty major concern at the time. He noted that in backing the arts that pay, while overlooking and undervaluing the arts that cost, Blair was showing himself to be the true son of Margaret Thatcher. Cultural policy had essentially morphed into an economic policy, with the government explicitly targeting the creative industries to generate a 10% slice of the entire gross domestic product. That's a huge shift in priorities.
And this brilliantly illustrates the clash of values that followed. On one side, you have the traditional view, art as a public good, rooted in intrinsic meaning and a shared human language. On the other side, the new reality, art as a commodity, focused entirely on cost-effectiveness, tourist attraction, and boosting the GDP. Under the UK Treasury's strict rules, every single government decision required a cost-benefit analysis. Policymakers literally had to invent monetary price proxies to slap onto abstract artistic values just to justify the funding. Crazy, right?
Which brings us to Section 3, the Faustian bargain and the hidden cost.
Because, as you might guess, this massive influx of cash came with some incredibly heavy trade-offs. As the director Richard Eyre argued, yes, we can justify the subsidized arts on the grounds of cost-effectiveness, but the arts really should make their own argument. They are a measure of our civilization. Culture had basically been dragged into Whitehall's Darwinian struggle for money. And the fundamental truth here? Beauty and art, well, they make public servants nervous. You simply cannot measure aesthetic value on a spreadsheet.
So, to soothe that nervousness, the government attached some serious strings to their billions. Arts organizations were suddenly subjected to strict target setting, super rigid funding agreements, heavy centralized oversight, and this relentless, exhausting demand for continuous innovation. They basically overlaid a highly sterile managerial environment directly onto the creative process.
And the profound irony of the whole shebang is that while the overarching goal was supposed to be social regeneration and creative freedom, this demanding culture of audit ultimately did the exact opposite. It stifled independence.
The constant pressure to hit numerical targets and mathematically prove economic value completely hampered free-ranging creativity and true artistic risk-taking. Trust in the artist was, well, entirely replaced by trust in the audit.
All right, on to the final part, Section 4, the Age of Lead and a New Experiment.
The shift, when it finally happened, was incredibly abrupt. We go from the initial funding surge in 1997 to Blair's famous Golden Age declaration in 2007, and then smash straight into a brick wall in 2010. Following the global economic crash, a new conservative Liberal Democrat coalition government took over, and they vigorously pursued cultural retrenchment and widespread deep austerity.
The final impact of this was incredibly stark. You had a rapidly retreating state. The government largely withdrew its active support for publicly funded culture altogether. We essentially entered an even purer experiment in neoliberalism, the state just stepping back entirely, hoping the private market alone would step up and fund the culture that society needs.
Which leaves us with a deeply provocative question. If we rely solely on the market to provide our culture, what is the true cost to our civilization? It really challenges us to stop and consider how we genuinely value our cultural capital. Does art only matter if it makes a profit? It's a lot to think about. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me. Stay curious, and I'll see you next time.